I'm Andy Schmuckler. I call myself a man on a mission. And for the last 20 years, a big part of that mission has been trying to help American democracy survive from a rising force of fascism as I've seen it. But that's part of a longer mission going back more than 50 years of trying to help human civilization survive for the long haul and avoid self-destruction. The mission is to convey something I believe could have a beneficial impact on both of those, a way of understanding the human story. And that's why I'm out here doing this, because I think that if enough people were to be thinking in these terms, and I don't know what enough would mean, it could have a beneficial impact, help us see the nature of the challenge that we face and fortify us to, because it's a better story both in I think, being more valid than the general way that we in our civilization understand certain things, but also better in the sense that it would be conducive to moving toward a better human future, because we would understand what we're dealing with. And that brings me to this book here called What We're Up Against. And it's a book that I wrote before Donald Trump took office, or even seemed like it was written before he became the presumptive nominee of the Republican Party in 2015. By the time it came out of the production process and went on to the market, it was after he had shown some dominance in the Republican field. He was obviously a major force to be reckoned with. But anyway, that forms the context in which this book came out. I've forgotten something you would think I would remember, but here's the deal. That book, What We're Up Against, it's the first book I ever self-published. I've had a handful of publishers over the decades, but I self-published this because I had this feeling that something disastrous was maybe about to happen in the 2016 election. What I don't remember is what I envisioned, because it wasn't Donald Trump. But I felt it was so imperative that if I had looked for a publisher, it wouldn't have gotten out before the election. So how could I possibly have the impact I was wanting to have to avoid this national disaster, which I can't remember how I envisioned it. But so I self-published it on Amazon Create or something like that. And I threw my whole self into it. That's what I do. I mean, I gave it my very, very best, and I really commend that book to your attention if you are interested in understanding the problem in America as it has arisen, and the context within which that problem should be understood. So I threw myself into that book, and it was my big play to have a beneficial impact. It was political enough so that it gave an original analysis of what's going on. That my craft is being able to do that kind of thing in a persuasive fashion, and that's what I've been trained for by my dad, and my education is places like Harvard and Yale and the University of Chicago and Berkeley. So I thought if I could get that out there, what else could I do? I mean, we're in danger of losing all that's been best about America, is how I have felt about it. That there was a battle to be fought, and it wasn't getting fought right. And it wasn't getting fought right uh, because it wasn't being understood right and perceived right. So I did everything I could to launch it well. And I even spent a fair amount of money for a publicist to get me out there, like I had gotten out really kind of well when let's see, how many years before would this be? Well, that was 1984. You know, I got out there as the author of that book, and I hired somebody to get me out there as the author of that book, which integrated an understanding of the forces at work in America and the forces that have defined the challenges of human civilization for the reasons that the idea that changed my life was understanding why it is that human history has unfolded as it has. And it turns out not to be a reflection of the creature's nature. It's got to do with a systemic force. I'm just going to leave that there. But what we're dealing with in America today and back in 2015, and starting in, for me in 2004, and maybe if when I recognize what was happening at the propaganda level, go back to 1992, I've been looking at this battle and seeing that it's part of a big picture of the forces at work in the human world. And if I could get this thing out there, if we could understand what we're up against and what we got to do to survive for the long haul and for, in the short run, for American democracy to survive, yeah, that would be getting our job done. So anyway, I don't need to make money at this point. And it is a pleasure for me to fight the fight to get it out there. Even if I understand that the getting it out there far enough to have an impact thing is really a long shot. I mean, it'd have to be some kind of a phenomenon for me to achieve what I'm trying to achieve. In that book, What We're Up Against, I make explicit my swinging for the fences ambition for the thing, in explicitly aspiring to be, for the America of 2015, what Uncle Tom's Cabin was for the America of 1850, whatever it was, two. I've studied that era, and you know, I'm always interested when I see that something in the of human creation got people to see things and feel things and do things differently because of what had been provided. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, isn't that the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin? Well, I think it is. From prominent New England family, if I recall, or two prominent New England families. She wrote this book about a slave and the slavery system that hit the North like a ton of bricks. It evoked all these passions that people had of a moral sort with respect to the institution of slavery. And there's a lot going on politically at the same time. So this was taking place in the context of a lot of stuff going on, like bloody Kansas, and talk of secession, and John Brown seizing the federal armory at Harper's Ferry. There is a lot going on. But you can see that this one book played a role in creating the tinder that prepared the North to fight the slave power. So having studied that and finding it kind of exciting, the way, I mean, it's just a portrait of some kind of a richness when a novel inflames tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of hearts in a particular way, which are conducive to the unfolding of a national civil war. Well, I wasn't looking to to get people to. I was proposing to do something similar, which was to awaken the good guys to what's at stake at the battle, and in a very different way. I mean, I'm not a novelist. Nobody's going to make a movie that people cry at about what we're up against. It's a different genre that I would love to have been a great novelist. I tried when I was in my early 20s. I wanted to be the American Dostoevsky. Well, I just didn't have it. So I didn't write Uncle Tom's Cabin. What I wrote is what I can do, which is I wrote a book that integrates a clear understanding of what's happening at the level of a political conflict in the United States and how that connects with the whole history of civilization and the nature of the challenge that we face as a species if we're going to survive for the long haul rather than destroy ourselves. Anyway, a man on a mission. I mean, don't cry for me, Argentina. I mean, on the one hand, I'm frustrated that I don't get it out there because I know I got the goods. But on the other hand, it's kind of, at the age of almost 78, I hate to think, well, what would I be doing if I wasn't, still saying the things that I think are worth saying. So it keeps me alive, even though I feel like, I'm that in terms of having the impact that I'm seeking to have, it's got to be almost Hollywoodian uh, to, to expect it to happen. And why would it happen anyway? And my belief, and I'm just going to be frank, I know it's a chutzpah, my belief is that if people actually take a look to see, well, what all has he put together and what does he prove and what are there important ramifications for accepting what he has proved? I feel confident that people would, but how do you get people in this day and age to take on, finding out, is there here really a better human story which has important implications for how you understand ourselves and our history and the challenges we face? I don't think people. I'm not sure if people conceptualize the possibility of that. Um, it's interesting that when Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote that novel, I read about it, and I'm trying to remember what I knew. Did she have any sense that she was lighting a match? Um, has anybody ever explained, was it the book or was there, did that happen only because the book came out at the particular instant that it came out? These are questions, I know that my book, The Parable of Tribes, which I think all by itself is just a piece of this better human story now. I think that, it changed the course of my life because I believe it has enormous ramifications for how we understand a whole lot of things. That's actually the foundation of things. It proves that we are better creatures than we have thought ourselves to be, and it identifies certain forces that we need to bring under control if we're to avoid destroying ourselves. I just feel convinced that to a large extent it does those things. So anyway, back in 2015, I'm swinging for the fences, as is my wont, and hitting, if I'm generous, I hit a single. Because it turns out that self-publishing, no matter what, it's a zero possibility that the New York Times is going to, and no matter what you did, the New York Times is not going to pay any attention to it. I didn't know that before I jumped, so I don't know what I've done. But anyway, it didn't reach, it was no battle hymn of the Republic. Though I still feel like it had the potential, if people took it in, to see what we're up against and what we got to do and the spirit in which we got to do it. Well, I still think that it had the inherent potential to have a beneficial impact. So I did what I could. I mean, that's just that's part of the fun. Is just how much can I do to get this to succeed? And part of it was to choose an op-ed piece that would accompany that would introduce that book to the world, and I had access to certain places where I could get such an op-ed piece published with a tagline which says basically advertises my new book. So here's the op-ed that I chose to read. Make America great again. Not a bad idea. But first we need to understand what's gone wrong. In every society, both constructive and destructive forces are always at work. But the balance of power between those forces is not constant. Such factors as the quality of its leadership and the impact of its national experience can strengthen either the best or the worst in a society. Consider, for example, the peoples of Great Britain and Germany at 2 points in the 20th century. In 1910, a time of relative stability before the outbreak of World War I, British society and culture might have been judged moderately healthier than the German, as a result of a somewhat more orderly history over the previous centuries and of the more democratic structure of power in Britain. But the difference between them was not dramatic. 30 years later, the balance of power between the forces of light and darkness in the two nations had become starkly different. In Britain, the words of a new leader, Winston Churchill, summoned forth the best in the British people, their courage and their commitment to defend humane values. In Germany, against which those values then needed to be defended, the leadership of Adolf Hitler was bringing forth the worst elements of German culture. While Churchill was inspiring the heroics in his people in their finest hour, Hitler was turning many of his people into moral monsters, his willing executioners. Many of us in America today sense an adverse shift in the balance of power between the elements that have made our nation great and those that tear down what's best about our nation. Some dimensions of this shift can be seen in three key elements of the American body politic. First, liberal America. Taken as a whole, does it convey its values in an inspiring way? If one compares what we have heard from recent Democratic leaders with the words that FDR spoke to the nation, words captured in his great 1940 I See in America speech, and those engraved in the granite of the FDR Memorial in Washington, the change seems unmistakable. The moral and spiritual passion that has largely been drained from liberal America, weakening the powers of its value to shape our society. The moral seem largely to have been drained from liberal America. The Pope's recent speech to Congress, this is 2015, provides another demonstration of how liberal values, compassionate concern for the well-being of all, and cooperation for the common good can be articulated with power and resonance. When it comes to the political right, who among us, not captive inside its propaganda bubble, can fail to see what a destructive force has taken over the once honorable Republican Party? One would be hard put to find from the past 15 years instances of that party's actions that have improved rather than damaged America. Among the hundreds of talking points that the Republicans have injected into our national conversation, one would be hard put also to find many that have been more truthful than deceptive. It is here we have paid the greatest price for liberal America's loss of moral and spiritual passion. The response from the liberal quarter to the rise of this destructive force on the right has been woefully inadequate. This combination of the destructiveness of the right and the weakness of the left has resulted in one of the most profound crises in American history. It is a time when, as the poet Yeats said, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are filled with a passionate intensity. A time when, as a result, the lie has too often defeated the truth. This brings us to the press, whose essential job is to tell us the truth we need to know in order to function as competent citizens. For more than a decade, we have been living through one of the most politically dangerous periods in American history. And then I have some bullet points. An extraordinary presidential assault on the rule of law between 2001 and 2009, including the torture memos, which provide a template for any future president to use to break any law with impunity. A massive transfer of power from the people to big money, aided by Supreme Court justices willing to sweep away precedent and contort the Constitution to bolster the power of the corporate system. The deliberate sabotage of the government for political advantage by the opposition party, which refuses to do the people's business in a determined campaign to obstruct the president, resulting in the least productive Congresses of modern times. I might say that the House of Representatives, controlled by this same party now, has produced an even less productive Congress. The crippling of the nation's ability to respond to the greatest challenge humankind has ever faced, climate disruption, by those who refuse to heed the most urgent warnings ever issued by the scientific community. All these unprecedented and degraded political developments are manifestations of the same coherent, destructive force damaging the nation. Yet much of the press on which our citizens rely for their understanding of events has hardly noted how extraordinary and dangerous these times are. Remember, this is back in 2015. The blatantness of things now has produced, made all this less true. It's so blatant that there's much more of the press that's understanding that we're dealing here with the spirit of fascism, which pretty much aligns with how we would want to describe an evil spirit. We've moved far in that direction, but there's still a weakness there that makes this still relevant. The good guys have never had enough passionate intensity as this whole battle has been unfolding, and now there is more of the intensity, but there's still the fear of overplaying one's hand when the problem has always been underpinning, underplaying. It was not always thus in America. Our nation was once a beacon to the world and could be again, but only if we can recognize, understand, and reverse the shift in the balance between the constructive and destructive forces at work in our nation. Yeah, I don't talk about good and evil. I just describe that if there's a virus of infecting this one part of the system, as fascism takes over, the immune system has to be alert enough to the presence of this threat and to respond to it with all the necessary force to defeat it. So had there been a liberal America that was ready to fight the fight that was being pressed upon it by the force of fascism, taking over the right, and Limbaugh and Gingrich and Fox News and Karl Rove and W. If the liberal world had taken it on as soon as its nature became visible, it never would have become such a great threat. But there's a combination of not seeing and not pressing the battle out of maybe fear. The causes of liberal weakness is something that I've addressed at some length. I don't want to go into it a great deal now. But it is a part of the picture that, for whatever set of reasons, and I've gone into it in my writings, liberal America lost some things that would have made it, equipped it to deal with the rising threat effectively, which I feel pretty clear that FDR, had he been leading the liberal democratic world against the force of fascism as it was rising, it never would have become nearly so powerful. I feel clear about that. But he had some kind of fortitude, and he had some kind of ability to see things that somehow got lost. We ended up with every part of the American body politic letting the ideal America down, and including also, of course, the American people. On the one hand, we had so many Americans that were vulnerable to being misled by a human monster who's clearly a con man, in it only for himself. And on the liberal side, I spent 16 years sort of raising the alarm and being considered extreme or harsh by, at least a fair number of people. It had to become ever more blatant what the nature of what Donald Trump represents, but originally he was a symptom. So anyway, there's a lot to be seen about what needs to heal in America. Regular liberals who didn't see, for for example, that Obama, as wonderful as he was forfeiting the battle where it needed to be fought. And after he left office, they practically deified him, though he opened the door to all this because he never fought the way it needed to be fought. That liberal America has been weak and blind. And without that, this danger would never have arisen. And the American people, the liberals in the general public, didn't see what was lacking, didn't see what was threatening. So my mission is to provide a big picture in which it is easy to see, actually, that there is a coherent force here that consistently works to make the human world worse, and that is the descendant of what we unleashed by becoming civilization-creating creatures, and it now threatens us with destructive force in the form of a force of fascism that's taken over part of the American power system. We're called upon in this benighted country not to be benighted anymore, and to fight the fight that needs to be fought and won, because everything that's sacred is at stake. Not only here in America, where if we become a fascist nation, a lot of things that are valuable about the lives we're able to live now will have changed in terrible ways, or at least ugly ways. We're called upon to see what we're up against and to make sure that that's not what gets to shape the human world. The big picture, this is part of the drama to determine whether human civilization destroys itself or gets its act together. It's that big, and that is an inevitable part of what it means to become a civilization creating. Eventually, you're going to have to get it together. And I'm not sure we're doing so well about it. So I'd like to get this way of seeing things, which I think will help us fight this fight and see what the battlefield is laid out to be. That a lot of things need to change to become as whole as we would want them to be. Thank you. Bye-bye.